Hi guys. So, I don't know if you saw my community post regarding this one, but this is actually my second time recording this video. The first video file kind of just exploded while I was in the middle of editing, so I have to start over. So apologies for any difficulties regarding that. Also, I cut myself shaving, so that's how today is going. So, Barbie, am I right? She's a global icon, a jet setter, an international success. You probably don't need me to tell you this, though. She's extremely ubiquitous. And if you're like me and you live in America or any other country where Barbie is quite literally everywhere, especially now, it's easy to forget that there are places where she is not so successful despite Mattel's best efforts. Personal anecdote to start us off. So, I'm a doll collector, obviously, right? I have been since I was around 13 years old, and when I was in college, I studied abroad in Japan. I lived with a lovely married couple who were actually only a few years older than I was, so it wasn't really like a host-parent situation like it was for some of the other people in my group. I promise this is going somewhere, just hang tight for a bit. And because we were so close in age, we really bonded. We had a lot of similar interests too. The wife, she was a huge fan of Akiko Higashimura. We talked all about Jellyfish Princess, and her husband was a big fan of Idolmaster and Love Live, and I remember he bought me a bunch of pins and straps of my favorite characters so I could decorate my school bag with them. So, point being, I felt close enough to them that I wasn't embarrassed to disclose that I was a doll collector and that I really wanted to buy some fashion dolls while I was in the country. And, they were totally cool with it. They found it really interesting. And on one of our free weekends, they took me around to a few different shops. The most bountiful of which was just an ordinary toy store. I think it was actually literally a Toys R Us in a mall. And I couldn't help but notice that Barbie had a pretty small presence there. There were a few Barbie dolls I saw for sale just here and there, but that was really it. No extra merchandise, really no pop culture impact at all. And maybe that's changed in the last few years, especially with the Barbie movie and all. I'm not sure. I haven't been back since then, but historically, Mattel has always kind of struggled with finding a place for Barbie in Japan. And that's basically the premise of today's video, a little doll history lesson on Barbie in Japan, and the various ways that Mattel has tried to market her there. It sounds fun, right? So let's go ahead and get into it. Barbie's history in Japan actually starts with her inception. In a way, she was born there. Back in 1959, Japan was the original manufacturing site for Barbie dolls. That's why on a lot of vintage #1 dolls, you will see Japan written on the bottom of her foot. And although she was more or less instantly a huge hit in America, she didn't really fare so well in the Japanese market. And there's a few different reasons for that, a lot of them due to cultural differences. This New York Times article from 1996, titled Barbie's Journey in Japan by Andrew Pollock, goes into a few of them. But when Mattel tried to sell Barbie here, it flopped. In the 1960s, as Japan was still rebuilding from the devastation of World War II, Japanese rarely saw foreigners and considered blonde hair strange, said Soichi Masabuchi, who teaches doll aesthetics at Japan Women's University. Moreover, Japanese felt inferior to Americans. Americans had big cars and air conditioners when Japanese homes didn't even have refrigerators, Mr. Masabuchi said. The article also mentions something else that I found pretty interesting, that in Japan, children don't necessarily idolize being an adult like they tend to do in America. Where here, we might see getting older is getting more freedom and opportunity. There, being an adult might be seen as acquiring more responsibility and pressure. So a child might not find as much play opportunity in a doll that is supposed to represent basically a young adult compared to one that is closer to their age. Which, yes, that's obviously a pretty broad observation, but it is an interesting factor to consider. Now, even though Barbie wasn't an incredible success like Mattel was hoping for, they did continue to sell Barbie there and experimented with a few different ways to hopefully make the products more appealing to a Japanese audience. For one, Midge, Barbie's best friend, she looked completely different in Japan. Here in America, she's pretty well known for her bright red hair and freckles. It's basically her trademark. But in Japan, Midge had a different face mold, dark hair and dark eyes. And before anyone gets pedantic in the comments, yes, I know there were versions of Midge in the 60s that had dark hair. But obviously the Midge sold in Japan was altered to better suit Japanese beauty standards. There was also a Japanese exclusive version of Skipper, who was also given dark eyes. But by far, the biggest hurdle for Barbie in Japan came in 1967, when the toy company, Takara, who would later be known as Takara Tomy, introduced their own fashion doll superstar, Rika-chan. And basically in every way that Barbie failed to connect with Japanese children, Rika-chan succeeded. She was smaller, she was cuter, she was marketed as an 11-year-old child, and she was designed in part by a prolific shoujo manga artist named Miyako Maki. And I don't want to go too deep on Rika-chan because this is a video specifically over Barbie, but she is a very important player in this story. Because now Mattel is seeing this doll do exactly what they were trying and failing to do, finding success in that way, and they realized that there was really no way to compete with her. So Mattel did something that I think was a very interesting move. Rather than continuing to try and compete with Takara and Rika-chan, Mattel decided to approach them for a partnership. Clearly, Takara knew how to succeed in the market, and Mattel really wanted to get a piece of that pie. It was a if you can't beat 'em, join 'em kind of thing, I guess. And in 1982, a completely redesigned Barbie was relaunched in Japan. This Barbie was slightly smaller, had a less mature figure, a rounder head, and of course a face that was very reminiscent of a shoujo manga sort of art style. Now, this specific version of Barbie is pretty officially referred to as Takara Barbie, sometimes as Japanese Barbie, but that kind of gets confusing because there's a lot of quote-unquote Japanese Barbies. And this reinvention of Barbie actually proved to be a pretty big success. The line got pretty expansive too. There were Takara Barbies in princess dresses, in casual dress, in school uniforms, in kimono. Takara Barbies that were aimed more at adult collectors, including this one that actually came with like a real mink coat. And they were able to get more characters in the line too. There was a version of Takara Kin that matched Barbie's new look, and some new friends for Barbie named Ellie and Flora. So with both Rika and now Barbie finding pretty wide success, that's great news for Takara. They were looking to be a pretty solid rival to the current #1 toy company in Japan at the time, our good old friend Bandai. And it's great for Mattel too, who is now just rolling in royalties from all the sales, and they got exactly what they wanted. Barbie is slowly but surely becoming cemented in Japanese pop culture. But, as you might have gleaned from my little story at the start of this video, that didn't exactly last. Takara Barbie's run was actually very, very short-lived. She only lasted from 1982 to around 1985, so give or take like 3 years. And what's really tragic about it is that it wasn't due to low sales or a low demand or anything like that. I could not find an exact reason as to why Takara and Mattel decided to break it off. Either all those articles are just gone or no one cared enough to write about why, but the most likely reason that I could gather just from looking around was because basically, as all this is going on with Barbie, practically simultaneously, Takara is working with one of Mattel's American rivals, the company Hasbro. In 1984, Hasbro launched Transformers, an extremely successful line of toys that were adapted from Diaclone, one of Takara's products. So, I can imagine that Mattel just wasn't very happy about this, and seeing the absolute phenomenon that Transformers became in America and the success it brought Hasbro, they probably decided that it just wasn't worth keeping up good relations with Takara. So in 1986, they formally ended their partnership and Takara Barbie was no more. And again, I don't know for sure if that was the reason. I couldn't find any official articles talking about it. I really only saw speculation. I wasn't there, but I think it does make a lot of sense and is probably the most likely explanation. Takara, however, still technically owned the rights to Takara Barbie's design, even if they didn't have the license to produce Barbie products anymore. And this doll was still immensely successful, so they didn't want to just discontinue her. So Takara actually continued to produce and release these Barbie dolls just under a new name, Jenny.
Hello, Barbie desu. Watashi no namae ga Jenny ni kawaru no.
And Takara actually gave a real in-universe explanation for this change. So according to Jenny lore, she's a 17-year-old from Los Angeles, and while she used to be named Barbie, she found her way to stardom by starring in a musical named Jenny, where she played the titular character, Jenny. And it was so successful that she decided to just roll with it and change her name to Jenny. Which, sure, I guess, just don't think too deeply about it, right? And even though she wasn't Barbie anymore, Jenny would still go on to be right behind Rika-chan in sales as the number 2 fashion doll in Japan. And Mattel, famously petty and messy company that they are, basically said to Takara, "So, you want to work with my rival? Watch this." And they immediately, that same year in 1986, went to Bandai and entered into a new licensing agreement with them. It's like a soap opera, right? Bandai's Barbies were released under the name Maba Barbie, which comes from a combination of Mattel and Bandai. She looked pretty similar to Takara Barbie, but had a thinner face and a few subtle differences, most of which were actually prompted by a lawsuit from Takara. To quote an article from Unseen Japan titled "Rika-chan, the doll that spoiled Barbie's fame in Japan," Tomy took offense at that and filed a lawsuit against Mattel for creating a clone of their formerly shared daughter. No joke, it was called the Doll Trial, or Ningyo Saiban in Japanese. Note, Takara didn't become Takara Tomy until 2006, I think, when Takara merged with the company Tomy. So that's a little source incorrect moment, but I did verify what they said about the trial and everything. That part is reliable. However, Maba Barbie was not nearly as successful as Takara Barbie, probably because, the doll that everyone was buying and had already gotten endeared to was still very much being sold, which that must have been a really awkward position for Mattel too, essentially having to compete with their own product that they helped create and losing to it too. Maba Barbie would continue to be sold until the end of the 1980s, after which Mattel and Bandai decided to dissolve their partnership. Mattel still hadn't given up though, and decided to try a new approach for Barbie in Japan. Or not really, they basically went back to what they were doing in the 60s and 70s by just directly distributing Barbie products in Japan. And that actually worked pretty well for them this time, to quote that 1996 New York Times article from earlier. But the biggest change is probably in Japanese taste, which in growing more cosmopolitan, thanks in part to an avalanche of American marketing, have swung more in Barbie's favor. The cultural landscape shifted in Japan since the 1960s and 70s, and now what was working against Barbie started to work for her. There were still some products here and there that were made specifically for a Japanese market, though. My favorite are the schoolgirl dolls, which had Barbie and this new character named Reina, both of which I think are just so cute. I really want to buy them one day, but they are extremely expensive. But like those and the Japanese exclusive birthday Barbie, you can see that the screenings are altered a bit from the American versions, specifically to be cuter and a little more shoujo-esque. But the vast majority of Barbie products in Japan now were not drastically different from those being sold in America. And that's more or less what Mattel has been doing with Barbie up to today. And although Barbie never really reached the popularity in Japan that either Rika or Jenny did, considering that she is still sold there, it's probably safe to say that her presence is at least sustainable enough for Mattel to continue distributing products there. I will say, as another personal note, although I didn't see a lot of Barbies specifically in toy stores, I saw a ton of Barbies, specifically ones from like the 90s and early 2000s, in thrift shops. Half the time, not even for sale, but just as decoration. Anytime I would go shopping for like J Fashion, especially on Takashita Street, I could almost always count on there being a Barbie somewhere just like watching over me. So that probably speaks a lot to Barbie's perception in Japan as far as like pop culture goes, I think. But again, it's been a long time. I'm not sure if a lot has really changed. But it is really interesting, isn't it? How Mattel went through all these hoops to try and integrate Barbie into the Japanese market, specifically seeking out their rival to help and going through all this corporate drama just for enough time to pass that they could go right back to what they were doing before with little issue. And today, as you can imagine, these Japanese Barbies are really hot commodities as far as collector's items go, which is actually partially why I wanted to make this video, to hopefully help other collectors be able to identify exactly what they're buying if they want to acquire one of these. Because like I said earlier, if you're just searching up Japanese Barbie, you're probably not going to find exactly what you're looking for. And you might end up buying a Jenny or even one of the American dolls that fall under the Japanese Barbie label. So, be vigilant, do your research, know your history, all that good stuff. I think that's all I really need to say. This video is probably going up. Oh, I do usually upload on Mondays, but Monday is literally Christmas, so probably after that. Sorry for the spotty activity lately. It's just been really busy, and you know how it is in the winter. It's hard. But I just wish you all a very merry Dolladay season, no matter what it is that you celebrate. If it's nothing at all, then I wish you a very happy December. I probably won't be back until after the new year, so happy New Year's too. Here's to hopefully another wonderful year spent rambling about dolls. But thank you all so much for watching. Also, be sure to go down in the comments and tell me if you've ever bought any Barbies from Japan, if you're interested in owning any, or even if you've bought any Rikas or Jennies. Tell me about those too. What do you think of Takara Barbie? Do you wish she would have lasted a little longer? Would you like to see like a modern day rendition of her? Whatever's on your mind, let it out down there. And when you're done with that, just be sure to like and subscribe for any future fashion doll content. Thank you.